This is Ask Joe number. $172. Yeah. Hello, and welcome. My name's Joe Gilder. Welcome to the podcast. It's been a while, and after one false start at getting this thing going, we're rolling now. I've got a good crew of folks here watching live over on YouTube Live. Hello, YouTube Live. Glad you're here. So I'm pulling questions from there, from Twitter, from Facebook. If you want to connect with me, please do. It's at Joe Gilder Music. That's where you can find me. Also, my website, homestudiocorner.com. There are well over 1,000 pieces of content there over the last 6 or 7 years of me putting stuff out. So lots of stuff to help you make better music. So how have you been? I hope you're doing good. Things have been pretty good around the Gilder house. We got a puppy. So you may hear him now in future videos and podcasts because my backyard is right there. He's tiny now, but he's a golden retriever. His name's Nash. He's super cute. He likes to attack my face. So that's good. Other than that, my girls turned 3 this Sunday, which is insane. I've got twin girls. And then I've got my 6-year-old or 5-year-old Owen. I knocked one of his teeth out yesterday. So, things are always exciting here. So, okay, I didn't punch him in the face. We have a trampoline, and he wanted me to, so he was sitting, and he wanted me to bounce him up. And I'm a big guy, so I can do this. So I started trying to bounce him all the way up to where he could stand up, and I got him going almost close, and I was about to go one more big bounce, and in the back of my head I knew probably shouldn't do that, but I did it anyway. And when he bounced, his knee came back and smacked himself in the face and knocked one of these middle teeth back. So it's still there, but today it's really loose. So it's a baby tooth. It was probably getting ready to come out anyway. That's what I tell myself, at least, to justify it. But yeah, I felt super bad, but I think it's okay. And, now I can say, hey, I knocked my kid's tooth out. He cried a fair amount. He was really sweet, though. I think he knew, I was, almost to the point of tears. You don't want to hurt your kid, and when you knock his tooth out, you feel really bad. So I think he got that. Anyway, so that's completely non-related to audio, but you people seem to like my family stories sometimes, so I tell you. So today I want to talk about... I really just want to kind of talk. I don't have a specific agenda. I definitely want to get to your questions. That's a big part of what we do here. What I do here is answer your questions. So send those in if you're here live, or you can send them to me on Facebook and Twitter. I'll try to pull those together for more of these. I want to do this more regularly. I apologize for being a little more intermittent. Been really busy. I released the latest version of Understanding Compression, so did a big sale, and those of you who picked that up, thank you. I hope it's been really helpful for you. Really enjoyed that. I'm actually thinking about what can I update next, and I'm thinking it's going to be guitar related. I've been in a big guitar mode lately, and it's really fun. So actually, let's talk about that, because I may end up relaunching my guitar recording series or combining them into one. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I've been really enjoying playing electric guitar and experimenting with different amp sounds and different guitar pedals and different approaches to things. And it's very, very much like mixing or just doing audio in general. If you're a guitar player or not, you'll get the reference. So I've got... You can't see it, but I've got a new pedal board on the floor. So I got a one that I had power built in, which was nice, and spent some time using custom cables to cut custom lengths and get the pedal board set up. And it's one of those things that literally you get it set up and you think, all right, this is how my pedal board will be. I shall never change it. And that was on a Saturday. And by Sunday afternoon, I had changed it once. And then by Monday, I changed it again. So it's, and not to say there's anything wrong with that, but as you can, I've talked about this a lot in the recent past. There's a very big draw to tinkering and toying with things to the point of it not really mattering. So I'm not going to rail on that much more, but to me, it reminds me of things like what order you put things on a pedal board really affects how the tone is changed. So if you put a compressor late in the chain, it acts very differently than if it comes right after your guitar. If you boost one pedal's volume into another pedal that's maybe a drive pedal, it does different things. If you send overdrive pedals into a clean amp, certain pedals sound good, some don't. It does something different than if you send it into a dirty amp or an amp that's kind of dirty. And the latest thing, yesterday I was playing in church, and I've been using almost exclusively for my amps the Avid 11 rack, which allows me to pull up a lot of amps that are great. I really recommend, by the way, if you don't have one, if it's a possibility for you and you are getting into recording guitar, even if you're not a guitar player, especially if you are bringing in guitarists in your studio regularly enough to justify the cost, you can probably get an 11 rack on eBay used for $300. That's what I got mine for. If nothing else, it's been really eye-opening for me to try out what a Fender Bassman, Tweed Bassman sounds like, a Fender Deluxe, a Fender Super Reverb, a Fender Deluxe Reverb, Vox AC30, various Marshalls like a JTM 45, and then some of the bigger super leads. And to really hear, even if it's not a perfect replica, to hear kind of how they respond and what they sound like with just a guitar, what they sound like with overdrive. Because what I've discovered is if you look over my left shoulder, see that cute little blonde-looking amp? That's a Vox AC4. It's a pretty cheap 4-watt tube amp that allows you to crank it down to just 1/4 of a watt, which gets really quiet, which is nice for home recording. And I've had it for years, and for a long time it was my only amp sound. And when I would get like a distortion pedal or an overdrive pedal and try to plug it into that for different sounds, it never sounded very good to me. And so I therefore decided that overdrive pedals just don't sound good. And I wrote off an entire category of things that people use to good effect because it wasn't working with my specific amp. As it turns out, that amp has no headroom. As soon as you start to, once you get past barely turning it on, it starts to overdrive really quickly. Maybe it's because it's a small wattage amp, I'm not sure, just it's the way it's voiced, but it's got a very pronounced overdrive to it and a very pronounced mid-range. And so pushing a lot of pedals that also have a pronounced mid-range into that amp didn't sound great. So like a Tube Screamer has a very pronounced mid-range boost that it gives the sound. Pushing that into an amp that also has a mid-range boost, it costs too much mid-range. It's part of the reason why I never really liked anything. So anyway, experimenting with an 11 rack has gotten me to a point where I understand these amps a lot more, and I understand how pairing up the right pedal and guitar with the right amp is a big name part of the game, right? Just like in the studio, pairing up the right vocal with the right preamp and the right singer, those types of things. The preamp's not as important really as an amp, but the right vocal and the right mic combination is a big deal, and almost more so than learning how to EQ and compress a vocal. If you get that right combination of putting the mic in the right place and using the right microphone for the job, suddenly the rest of the stuff gets a lot easier. And it's the same thing with the guitar. If I'm wanting this certain sound, if I want a Fender sound, there's no point in pulling up a Marshall and trying to dial in a Fender sound. I should pull up a Fender. Now, that's what's so great about the 11 rack. I'm not going to go buy, at least not now, a Marshall, a big Fender, a big expensive Vox, and spend, $5-6 grand on a couple of really nice guitar amps, because I can't justify that. But that gives me a very close intimation of what those sound like. And it's all software driven. It's inside the box. So someone's asking in the chat, is it, if he's asking if I mean just the 11 rack or software, amp modeling software in general. The 11 rack was the first one I heard that I really liked the sound. It didn't sound fake to me. I'm sure things like Guitar Rig and I don't even know what else is out there, honestly. I'm sure they all sound great now. But it's still, to me, that was the first one I heard that sounded great, and so I use that. Plus, I prefer to use something out of the box than software, because I can take this with me to a gig. I can play with it without having to pull up a software and a DAW. Amplitude and Guitar Pro are other ones I've not used in a long time. I've never used Guitar Pro. I've used Amplitude. I mean, I don't know what to think. Go listen to it and see if you like the sound of it. For me, the 11 rack is great. It models things really well. Like the spring reverb that's modeled in there sounds fantastic. Way better than any other spring reverbs I've been able to try. So anyway, all this to say, that's allowed me to develop an ear for the different types of amps and to kind of hone my preferences for, okay, I like these types of amps, and these types of amps play well with these types of pedals. So I'm starting to adjust which things I use and which pedals I use to get the tone that I want. And it's actually, honestly, I'm on the verge of buying a Fender amp because I've played so much with this and really spent time with it to the point where I think I know what actual amp I want to get, which is way better than buying a bunch of amps and then realizing you don't like any of them, right? So the same thing if you're thinking about getting some hardware analog gear. If you can get the software equivalent and really try out a bunch of different types of gear, you can hone your ear to figure out which one sounds best to you. So I'm not big on buying a bunch of stuff, especially when it comes to mixing. But when it comes to recording, I think it's a different story. You want to get great sounds on the front end. So I will always end up spending my money, if I have the choice between a plug-in bundle or a guitar or an amp or a microphone or even maybe a preamp, I'm going to go that direction versus spending it all on software that's not going to really change the quality of the recording itself. And I'm also, as I've said before, I need to spend more time rehearsing my guitar parts than researching guitar or even noodling around with pedals in order and things like that. Quick question, then I'll jump into the questions. Actually, you know what? That's a good stopping point right there. This may be a guitar-themed episode. As we go through the questions, we will see. But why don't we do that? Why don't we jump into the questions? Boom. All right, so this is the part that's all about you. Thank you for giving me my little moment to do my little rant. And now we're back with some of your questions. So here's a couple of questions that came in while I was talking about that 11 rack. Let's see. This is from Jonathan. He says, can you reamp with the 11 rack? You can. I actually just discovered the other day, it's got an amp output that you can run your pedal board into the 11 rack and play that back through your speakers, and then you can actually run an output to another amp and have a 2-amp rig, so maybe a clean amp and a dirty amp going at the same time. Sounds really cool. As far as reamping, you can. I don't really know a lot about it. I've not done reamping with it. I don't like reamping. I like getting it right the first time, so that's why I can't really answer, because I just don't really do that, if that makes sense. But I actually use it as an analog box. I don't actually use the USB connection. I run the XLR out into my interface and use it that way. So I'm committing on the front end just like I would if I was using amps and microphones and things like that. Here's an un-guitar related question from TG1417. What's your process to songwriting? For me, songwriting is not something I do super regularly. I'll get into a phase where I'm wanting to write for a new project, and then I'll just write, and I'll kind of batch them together. So I don't write every day. Part of me wishes I did, but I've just never been wired that way. But for me, the process is sit down and come up with something on an instrument that feels good to me. I may have a rough idea of kind of topic-wise what I'm looking to do or what I want the song to be about. And so usually if I'm in a certain mood, happy, sad, pensive, the music will kind of come out in that sort of mood as well, so then I can start working on lyrics. But usually it's coming up with a guitar progression, a guitar riff, a piano progression, something to me that isn't old hat, that's something that's new, something I haven't heard before, and that I like. And then once I have that, I usually come up with I just start singing over that and something comes out. Sometimes it's the chorus, sometimes it's the verse. I don't know. I never know what's going to come out. And for me, that's kind of how I write the lyrics as well. I just start singing stuff until I get a phrase or two that I really like, that seems like it's moving in the right direction. Then I sit down, I put the guitar down for a minute, and I write out a verse. So I use that line that I came up with, and I'll write out, whether it's the chorus or the verse, I'll come up with the rhyming structure and the lyric for that, and then I'll come back and sing it over and over, and then I'll keep adding sections to it. But for me, it's honestly, when I did my 50-song challenge back in 2014, where I wrote 50 songs in 12 weeks, I got in a very specific groove where almost to the minute, it took me about 45 minutes to write a song. It'd take me maybe 10, 15 minutes to kind of come up with the overall musical rough structure of the song, and then I would just pound out lyrics, and by about the 45-minute mark, unless I was just stuck, I'd have some semblance of a song finished. Got some questions over on the Facebook. Here's one from Jerry Buell. He says, Joe, when you first started recording at home and seeking new clients, were there any obstacles you had to face, such as clients maybe overlooking home studios for the commercial studios, clients wanting analog versus digital? Were there any other obstacles or mindsets you had to deal with that you might be able to share with those who want to pursue it as a job on the side or possibly a full-time career? I was talking about this with a friend the other day. He was asking me, he recently moved to Nashville. He's a drummer. He's got a setup in his home studio, and he's already working with people. And he uses Logic, and he was asking me if I was using Studio One and if I thought that was a hindrance to getting clients who think, oh, you got to have Pro Tools and that type of thing. And honestly, it's not ever been a problem for me because I don't think I attract those types of clients. If I'm working with someone, it's because they more than likely they know me as a musician. They like my music. They listen to my music and my recordings and think that sounds great. I want to work with you. I don't have people coming and saying, okay, now what preamps do you have? Are you using Pro Tools? They typically don't care. A lot of them don't even do audio, so they don't even know those questions to ask, if that makes sense. Others, they just work with me because they like me as a musician and they want to work with me. So those are the kind of people I want to work with anyway. So it could be that I'm doing what some people call repulsion marketing, where they actively kind of repel the wrong customer while simultaneously attracting the right one. So for me, here's a great example. Through all the content I put out, if you've been following me for any length of time, you know I'm kind of the guy who uses stock plugins and harps on getting it right at the source. If I had to boil myself down to a couple sentences, that's kind of it. So if you are the kind of guy or girl who likes to use a bunch of fancy plugins and who wants to record something down and then have the engineer fix it and make it work better, I'm not going to be your guy if you spend 10 minutes looking at my content online, because I'm much more about the performance. So, I mean, in that sense, I think I probably don't even get asked about gigs from people who would have asked those questions. So, I mean, honestly, I watch this YouTube channel called That Pedal Show. I've been a recent convert. It's these two guys based out of Britain, and they talk about guitar pedals. But one guy he's really smart, and his name's Dan from Gig Rig, Daniel. And he's really smart, and he says pretty regularly, what does he say? I can't remember it now. There's no right or wrong answer, but there are better questions. Something along those lines. It's not so much about finding the answer as asking better questions. So for me, because a potential client is asking, do you have Pro Tools? I don't think it's your next step has to be no, but I'll get it, or a defensive mood. Really, you could just come back with, well, I don't think that's the right question. If you've used a lot of different pieces of software, you can say I've used a lot over the years, or you can say you stick a Squier guitar in Eric Clapton's hands and it sounds amazing. So it's not really about the tools. I use the tools that I think work best for me to get the best results. And just kind of gently nudge them into, hey, that doesn't matter. And they may just not be about that. But I mean, honestly, unless you're like putting out ads on Craigslist and saying you're a pro studio, and then they're asking, okay, prove it, and then it turns out you've just got a 2-channel interface and an SM57, then yeah, you've probably built yourself up as something that you're not, and so you're gonna have to dig yourself out of a hole. But if you're more so organically meeting people and eventually getting to a point of working together, then I think you just got to be yourself. And yourself is, I mean, I'm so much about being yourself lately. The last couple of years of just being who you are and not apologizing for it and embracing it and really going deep, pushing all your chips, going all in on you, and then trusting that there are people who would connect with that. So for me, I'm all in on the things I'm all in on when it comes to Home Studio Corner, and I probably leave out a huge chunk of people who would really be maybe potential followers and customers because of the things that I focus on. There are other people like my good dear friend Graham Cochran. He's got a much bigger audience than I do, and I think he appeals to a different group. There's so many different factors at play, but I can sit here and try to be Graham Cochran, but that's just not going to work, right? I can sit here and try to imitate him, try to copy what he's doing, but it would be disingenuous. And the reason, if you're watching this and you're a follower of me, it's because you've on some level connected with me warts and all. There are people who hate how on the fly, for example, this podcast is. I've talked about that before. They want me to be super edited and super organized, and that's just not how I want this to be. I want it to be more raw and behind the scenes, and that's going to turn some people off. Could I get more people if I made it more smooth? Probably, but that's just not me. So there's a balance to be made. If you're using really garbage equipment and you're using that same argument, then yeah, you're kind of in a dream world. But if you have decent equipment and you're getting decent results and your mixes sound good, then yeah, I think go with what you know and have the rest of them kick the curb if they don't like it. Here's one from Louis Salazar. Says, any tips on DADGAD tuning? I know the concept, but I haven't tried it yet. Biggest thing I would say is try it. DADGAD is a tuning, so you tune your guitar from low to high, D-A-D-G-A-D. So it's more of an open tuning. You can play a lot of chords with just one or two fingers. If you go to my music site, joegildermusic.com, there's a couple. The one that comes to mind that has DADGAD on it is on my Hymns record, which is it's called Help of the Helpless. Go listen to I think it's the last song on that album. Yeah, it's called Abide With Me. It's got a couple of DADGAD guitars on there. DADGAD's great. Open tuning's great. If you listen to artists like Dashboard Confessional, some of their older stuff was all open tuning stuff. A lot of Goo Goo Dolls was open tuning stuff. Stephen Curtis Chapman uses a lot of open tuning. It has this open, bright sound to it, right? There's always a few notes that are just droning on, regardless of what chords he's playing underneath. It can be cool. It can also get really bright really quickly, especially if you start doubling things or if you don't mic it well. Suddenly it becomes very mid-rangey and very bright, and you lose any body, and it can sound very kind of plasticky and cheap. So from a recording standpoint, you got to be careful with open tuning and make sure it works well in the mix. From a playing standpoint, I don't do DADGAD a lot when I'm playing or performing. On a handful of times have I played a show or played at church where I'm just playing DADGAD. But there are some songs that may just work better in that tuning, and it's worth knowing how to do it and getting familiar at least with how it sounds and some of the interesting chords that you can play on a DADGAD tuned guitar that you can't play as well on a standard tuned guitar. But that's a really good question. Let's see, here's a question on my... And here's a quick thought. Somebody said a 2-channel interface and an SM57 is his exact setup. Don't hear me as saying that's a bad setup or that you can't get fantastic... sorry, the chats are coming through. It's hilarious. That you can't get fantastic results with that. But if you're saying, come track your entire band at my studio, and you're kind of implying that you can do drums, bass, guitar, vocals all at once, and you've got one microphone, then that's getting a little weird. So that's all I was saying. But yeah, you can do great things with just a 57 and a decent preamp. So a decent interface. And Stephen C. puts it out there. He says, Graham Cochran is more physically attractive. We do the best with what we've got. See, that I was going to say that, but I didn't. I thought that would get awkward. But yeah, he's a good-looking fella. And, I got about 50 pounds to lose. So maybe when I lose 50 pounds, my numbers will shoot up. I'm kidding. That's probably still not going to happen. All right, final. I think I only have time for one more question, then I got to get this thing edited and posted for all the folks who didn't make it out live. Shame on you for not making it to the live stream. Jonathan says, any thoughts on large diaphragm condensers versus small diaphragm for drum overheads? What's your setup, a matched pair of microphones? So that's a good question. For the album Better This Way, which we recorded here in my studio at the last house we were in, but it just all in one room, I did use a matched pair of Earthworks. So those Earthworks mics I referred to earlier, I had a pack of 3. I sold one, traded one for a guitar. The other 2, they're the SR25s, directional cardioid small diaphragm condensers. I thought they did great. That was also the album where I accidentally overloaded the inputs on my console because I had had them going to my 2-channel tube preamp, but then the preamp on my board, instead of being set at unity, was turned all the way down. So I cranked the tube preamp, so there was some overdrive on the tube preamp. There was probably some distortion clipping happening coming into the input. So those overheads, if you go listen to the overheads by themselves, if you're a mixed practice customer, you'll hear there's a lot of grit on them. So that wasn't intentional, but it actually turned out okay. But yes, I like them for that. But honestly, if you desert island microphone kind of thing, especially when it comes to condensers, I'm going to go with a large. I can do more with a large diaphragm condenser. I've never had any luck using a small diaphragm condenser on something like vocals. I've seen them in the magazines where they're doing it. I've tried it with a few small diaphragms. It just doesn't work as well for me, and they can be very bright. And that could be just a matter of the small diaphragms that I've used, but they do, because the diaphragm is smaller, it moves more easily, which means the subtlest detail can get picked up by it, maybe not quite as much as a large diaphragm. It's not a huge difference, but I've noticed the small diaphragms pick up a lot, and they don't really add a lot of color to the sound because they tend to want to be cleaner. And so for acoustic guitar, for example, on my album Help of the Helpless, I used all small diaphragm condenser on acoustic. On the last, on Better This Way, I used large diaphragm, and it's just a different sound. And I liked both, but I had a hard time getting a full sound with a small diaphragm. So that's why I own a couple small diaphragms, but I don't reach for them almost ever. Now, your mileage may vary. I say try them if you have them, but I don't see myself going out and buying small diaphragms anytime soon. Okay, quick question. Red-Blooded Christian says, wants to use gobos in a mixing environment. I have them. They roll around the room. I put them to the left and right of my speakers when I'm mixing, and they work really well. It's a great solution, one of my favorite pieces of gear, and I gotta go. See ya.